me. But if they know they didn't want Federate.
This is Paul Wanted to Digital. Monday to For Wanted to Digital Monday, Hard Talk starts in a short with hosts Dennise Demming and Karen Nunez Tesheira. We have some special guests to join us on the program this afternoon. Let me say hi to the ladies while I link up one of our guests. Okay, so good afternoon, Karen. Good afternoon, Dennise.
Good afternoon, David, and good afternoon, Karen. How are you?
Yes, I saw it. Sorry, so we had words. I'm looking at you. Your mind was far away. I have a feeling your mind was far away. But in any event, good morning, good afternoon to you, Dennise, and of course to David, always there, so supportive of me, as is Dennise, and of course our listeners. And Dennise is the one that makes sure that we keep the system, structures, and procedures in place, and in particular, getting people to call in. That's how with her background in communication, I know that's going to be helpful. So I'm going to let Dennise start up today's show, which is on the issue that is, it's never got off the it's never ever not been an issue that of national importance. Has it ever? I don't think there was a period that we never spoke about it.
But it's always been discussed, but I really feel that the issue of the Constitution is not something that the man in the street feels as if they can ask a question about. I don't think the person in the maxi taxi will be sitting down and saying, okay, how lovely they're talking about the Constitution. They might be saying, okay, so what is that about? So I'm hoping that today we can have a conversation that makes it a little more meaningful for our people and for a lot of our young people.
Well, our guest will be joining us in a short while. I had to readjust his email, and I just sent him the link. So in a short while, he'll be with us.
All right, that's lovely.
And Dennise, I want to say it's not just the man in the maxi. It's not a sexy topic, to put it bluntly. It really isn't. You know what I mean? If you talk about murder trial, bail, here he is with us. Timothy, I think Timothy's coming in at 5. Isn't he coming in?
No. Timothy's coming in at 4:15.
Okay. Oh, well, Timothy, there we go. Well, we have a lovely view of you, Timothy.
We have a lovely view of the sea. While we're waiting for Timothy to come on and for us to see him, I hope we will see him in this conversation. I just want to say that many, many years ago, when I wanted to go to UE, when I left Holy Name, I only had 4 levels. So I wanted to do a degree, so I wanted to go to UE. In order to go to UE, I had to get at least 2 A levels. And I was trying to figure out which 2 A levels to get. And there's a guy who had a school called Elder.
Yes, I am. Yes.
He suggested to me that there are 2 easy A levels to do: economics and British Constitution. I had to study those 2 things to get into UE, which I eventually did.
Was it right? Was he correct? Because I think that
he was
right.
in those days.
Right.
In those days, yes. And because I had left school, so I didn't have very many options in terms of A levels. Those were 2 to do. Economics was not easy at all for me, not at all. When I tell you, economics was really terrible for me. So Tim is saying that he's on, but we're only seeing his background. But Tim, okay.
We'd like to see you though.
No, but he'll have to change the background on his laptop for that to happen. Okay, no, back to the lovely ocean view.
But we'd like to see you though. I think we would appreciate seeing you.
Seeing him on this.
And we are not here. Let us make it very clear. Both persons today do have a political background, but they are not here to talk. They're here to share their views on constitutional reform. As persons in our community who have a specialist knowledge of the topic, and yes, there you are. You're fighting to get on, and you won. Mr. Arnold Smith.
And Tim, your background is the beach, so it looks as if you're in this very, very exciting place.
We want you to look. We want you to look.
I'm not hearing anything.
But
Oh my
we're
God.
hearing you.
We are hearing you.
That's the problem with
Yeah.
age, you know, this age thing.
No, this is
You're on mute.
Check your audio.
Well, telling him that he can't even hear that because he can't hear you telling him that. He's looking for it. Well, what they say? Bad beginnings make for good endings. I hope it will end. But we have to hear him. Could you
Are you
call
hearing
him?
us? Mr. Smith, are you hearing us?
Call him?
so. Karen, while he is working that
Are
out,
you hearing him? Timothy, can you talk?
I don't think he's hearing us.
He's not hearing us.
No.
Okay. All right.
so Karen, while he is figuring it out,
Oh,
while he's
God.
figuring it out, let me ask you a question. What do you think Hope received today from this conversation?
Well, you know, I can say on, you just know that, but we hear him humming. We hear him humming. So we must be able to hear him talk.
But Karen, I want to know.
He
Okay,
probably
all
has
right.
to look
You
at
can
somebody.
okay, I am being distracted. I will say for myself, I did constitutional law as a student, and I hated it because I couldn't relate to it. I found it was so well. Maybe the lecturer, you know, which is so high end. He's calling me, so I'm going to answer. Timothy,
Yeah, you see me. I'm on screen, but I can't hear your.
and we are hearing you now on the thing when you're talking to me on the phone. So you're supposed to have a button, a mute button, or unmute button on your screen.
Yeah, I unmuted. It's not muted.
It's not mute.
He's not muted on the
Unmuted.
system here either.
It's not. So like they
Probably should put up your audio.
but
I
yeah,
tried
put the
that.
audio. Yeah, because he's pretty good with that. He's pretty good with the
My audio is on full.
Oh.
what is this then? We going, but you know what we do? You know your background though. We have a beach in your background.
Right, I can see.
I don't kind of looking too academic, huh? I have to tell you.
All right. Well,
We can't do nothing about that.
can we work with the say
Like that. Yeah, let him talk like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fire away. In the fire line.
Denise was asking, she was already asking, and you can answer that because you're the guest. He made a point that we are not talking party politics at all.
Sure.
We asked persons like yourself. You are former president of the Senate, and you are one of the top law firms, head of top law firms. So you are more than acquainted with the constitutional aspect of the law. And it's a very sort of esoteric, unsexy part of the law. And it's very intimidating, I think, to a lot of people. And what Dennise was saying is what we wanted to do today was to try to kind of break it down so that the man in the street can understand why it is really relevant to them and what it can mean to them on an everyday basis. So we handed it over to you. Give us some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so you're very right. I mean, when I reviewed the Constitution, it has so much legalistic stuff in it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
I echo it.
Yeah, echoing. I was echoing too. And you know what, too? We seen you sideways. I think you have to turn, right. Okay.
So if you read the preamble,
Mm-hmm.
you would see it has a lot of whereas.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, my experience, when lay people see that, they close the document because they say, I can't understand anything. And that's the first thing I would change. It needs to be in the affirmative voice. We, the people, say this, and this is what we want. And I think it starts off on the wrong footing, which is why most people see it as this doesn't really have any, this is for lawyers. It has nothing for me. But it shouldn't be so. A constitution should be a living document. the talks to the people as they evolve. And hence the reason why, of course, this really is since independence. We may have had a Republican constitution, but they were just more cosmetic changes than anything else. And we're living with an instrument that is 60 years old. And it needs to get, some lipstick and makeup.
More than that, more than cosmetic.
So there are things to be done. I mean, by and large, it's a good constitution. The framework of it, the core of it, but there is a lot that we need in today's world where you have iPhones weren't thought of, or internet. We couldn't be speaking and looking at each other 60 years ago, not in two different rooms anyhow. So you can imagine how the world has changed. And we need to revisit the Constitution so that it reflects modern day living and practice and impacts directly on people.
So because of our limited time also, I wanted to go to some specific areas where I think the man in the street will be able to say, oh yes, I could see how that does affect me. Let us look, for example, a fixed election date. Let's look, for example, crossing the floor and recall. Let us look at referendum, that me calling those three together. And then after that, because that's three issues, the referendum, a fixed election date, crossing the floor, and what they call recall, and an area that I would want to look at, I think, by itself, which is the electoral voting system, because you do have ideas about that. So let's look at those three things that people could say, well, and of course the Privy Council, which is coming with the referendum.
Yeah. All right. So if we looked at fixed election date, recall, referendum, maybe limits, two-term limits for prime ministers, those are easy fixes. In fact, if you look at the Constitution, what it really says, I think it's section 56, you can make any change you want to the Constitution, but if you want to change certain sections, you require a special majority. And there are two levels to that. But all of the items that you mentioned only require a simple majority. I'm not talking about that. But you could have, tomorrow morning, you could have a fixed date election, you could have two-term limits, you could have recall and referendum. There's nothing stopping.
And why would you? And I am sorry to interrupt you, but the reason I'm interrupting you is, even though you're saying that's what you could do, people need to understand why you want to limit it to two fixed terms. For example, they've said in Guyana that although Dr. Isran Ali is the president, that really Jagdeo was wanted to be, but their constitution said you could only have 2 terms. So that in a real way, you could see that. Then when you talk about a referendum, they have done referendums in some of the other Caribbean islands to make the Privy Council, CCJ, the last final court of appeal, and those referendums have backfired on the government of the day. And then the crossing the floor. What does that mean to the parliament and the power of the government? Why would you want to change any of this?
Yeah. So if you look to term limits, I think around the world, people have recognized, not peculiar to Trinidad and Tobago, that after you've been in power for over 10 years, power has a way of taking hold of you and making you feel like king. One of the Caesars, it is said, used to have somebody walking alongside him, telling him, remember, you're only a human. And we tend to forget that, when we're entrenched in power. I remember Tony Blair. Tony Blair served 3 terms. If you read his book, and I love Tony Blair, so I'm not putting him down, but after the second year, he really began to think that only he could do it. And he stayed on for the 3rd year. And of course, that's when he made all his mistakes about invading Iraq. which really sullied his reputation. And we've seen, I mean, I remember one of our writers made a big point of it in relation to Mr. Manning. This point in time, when you've been in power so long, you think that you know everything, that you don't need to listen to people, and shall we say in a Trinidad expression, it goes to your head. And
Right.
you're trying to save the person from themselves.
So that's a reason why you're limited
important.
to 2 FX tools, because if you were able to do a third time, then the power would really go there. But the other thing that I should, because it's said in today's papers, as if the Prime Minister is getting ready to call an early election. Because right now, I was actually went to look at United States their laws, and they say it's the first Tuesday after the first Monday in the month of November. So their elections is already set from the last election for November before 2022. Of making sure that you do have 6 rather than being able to call an election as all the Constitution now allows after a year, after 2.5 years, as Mr. Manning did, after 3 years. What is the danger of that? Or what is the...
But it gives you an unfair advantage. And that, therefore, there is no level playing field. And that's what you want to achieve in a democracy. So I think it runs against the grain to say that you should be entitled to pull it out of your back pocket when convenient, when strategically. But, all of these things have been incorporated in local legislation. It was passed in the Senate. People seem to have forgotten that. The Senate actually passed legislation fixing the date of the election, recall, not referendum, and I think limited to 2 terms. But that when it reached the House, it didn't see the light of day. And I myself, one of the things they sought to do was change the electoral process, the electoral system, I should say, from what we have now, first past the post. Do you remember the double voting system, in which, properly so, you wanted to have the winner have more than 50% of the vote. Otherwise, you potentially have a minority government with more people against you than for you. And, there's a danger in that, because if there are more people against you than for you, how do you get a critical mass of people to pursue a single vision for a country? And the country then remains divided, and it is hard to persuade people, and people are always, if you like, on the pavement, knocking, making noise, saying that this does not satisfy them or that. And that is self-defeating, as it were. And that is true. But unfortunately, I certainly thought that legislation, one should, when you're going to amend the Constitution, at very least you need to not impose it on the people, but it should have been sent, in my view, to a joint select committee, but not just a joint select committee, a roving, if you like, joint select committee, one that can go to San Fernando and to Central and to Tuco and to Port of Spain and to Tobago to hear what the people have to say about the changes that you want to make. And I think that was the shortcoming of that legislation, which in fact the government actually withdrew in 2013 or 14. I can't remember what year it was laid before Parliament. So we
and that
have
is that the first? Is that the
more important steps that will take special majorities to achieve? You talked about the Privy Council. that would take a special majority if you wanted to change that.
What I wanted to stick on, I mean, all right, I don't know coming from where, but anyhow, and I don't know where Dennise is. Dennise has disappeared. But what I wanted you to, if you could explain, because what you were really saying is the system of government which we inherited from England, the Westminster model, has two houses, the Senate and the lower house. Yes, we have the Senate and the lower house.
Sure.
And the difficulty with the first past the post system is that you end up oftentimes with minority government. That meaning that they do not have the majority of the votes of the electorate, but because of the system of elections, they end up forming their minority government, and they have difficulty. I think Margaret Thatcher had that problem too. They have difficulty in running a country where they are really are in government because of that system. So could you explain to the man in the street, to everyone, to all of us, the first past the post system and the alternative of proportional representation or a mixed system like they have in Guyana, like they have in Sweden and Norway and all they say 60% of the countries have it. If you could explain the difference between the first past the post and the other alternative and why it is that one is probably better suited to the other.
So in Trinidad, I mean, if you look at past elections, where you find that up to 23% of the population have had their votes really amounting to nothing because you got no seats for the party for which you vote. And therefore, and that's happened on several occasions, in 81, in 2005, in 1991. That in democracy, you want as many people to have representation as possible. That's very hard to do. If you don't have representation in Parliament, then you say, well, I might as well stay home. I can't participate. I don't feel I'm part. I have played a part in the governance of the country because I can't even vote for my representative. And of course, what happens?
What does the first past the post mean? What does that mean? Because I don't think people or everybody knows what that really means, as opposed to.
So what happens in each? We have 41 constituencies, and in each constituency, a party puts up its candidate. So if you have three parties, you're vying for who will win that election. In first past the post, whoever gets the majority vote, and it might be, let's say, 34%, he might get the vote. And the next party may get 22%, and another party 20%. Just calling random numbers. It means the party with 34% wins the vote in that candidacy, wins the seat in Parliament. But yet, if you looked at the minority vote, it exceeds what the majority received. So that's why you get a minority government in the first past the post system.
A lot of people are not represented in the Parliament then.
Correct. I mean, I suggested 23%. And that's why you have the Boston Tea Party in the United States when they sought their
taxation without representation.
Exactly. And in fact, what you have done, you have a system that disenfranchises people. If my vote doesn't count, then I might as well not vote. And that may account for the fact why we have such a high non-voters, appeal, because people feel that their vote doesn't count.
Isn't that inconsistent with a political democracy? Because there are times when
particularly
shown it that when you see the number of persons who voted for X party did not win because of the first past the post system, because the number of constituents in that particular constituency may have been, many more of them may have come out and vote, but that's only one constituency, and they're counted by constituency. So at the end of the day, you might end up with one getting 22 constituencies and the other one getting, I guess, 19. But when you look at the numbers, you might find out very well that the Correct had more people turn out and vote, and yet they have absolutely no say in the running of the country because they are either in opposition, if they hopefully they might be in opposition, or linked to that position. So what would the proportional representation be? And I think you are a proponent of that.
Yes. So proportional representation, in particular mixed form of proportional representation, first past the post, would allow you to retain the same concept of having a candidate in your constituency, and people are accustomed to that. But additional to that, you would get seats which were proportional to the vote that you got throughout the country. So if Party A won 40% of the vote, they would get 40% of the seats in Parliament. If they won 30%, then they would win 30% of the seats. And if another party won another 20, another 5, all of them, and that's where you get better representation.
So everyone would be represented.
Everybody would be represented. Some people, challenge that and say, well, look, that's going to result in having to have a coalition. Two people from different parties would have to join. But the fact is that allows for more voices to be heard. It works throughout Europe. They have, they have coalitions all the time at every election. It requires people to sit down and negotiate, and therefore people feel that a wider voice is being taken into account when you determine the policies of a country. And of course, in 2015, it happened in the UK as well. You had a coalition government, and that worked very well for the 5 years, where one party put forward its policy and they negotiate what posts you will take, what policies you will pursue. So in a sense, you are more representative of the entire country. I think that proportional representation allows for better representation and better governance. But to get that, you require a three-quarter majority to get to that point. There is an in-between system that you can achieve that achieves a certain level of proportionality. It's called the preferential voting system. So you get it in Australia, in Ireland, in some states in the United States have proportional preferential voting. And there it's voting as we traditionally do now, but the counting of it is different. When you go and see your ballot paper, you will number which candidate is your first preferred candidate, your second preferred, and your third preferred candidate, or fourth. And you tally the votes from all the people. So at the end of the day, every vote counts. Because you look at the person, you start off the person who got the least amount of votes. You look to see who they chose for a second place, and then that goes to the second place voter. So it's a more complex counting system. But
they do the local government. They have to do that with local government.
Exactly.
Right? Municipal corporation.
We have some experience with it. And
exactly.
I think it has achieved the objective.
Which is what?
Of better representation.
Yes, a more democratic, because if you, and where it becomes even more an issue in Trinidad is because of race. And because of people voting along ethnic lines, you will find that voting patterns will tend to follow that kind of thinking. And so one half of the race, if you want to put it down, being very vulgar, I mean, it would not be represented, and it causes ill will. When you talk about minority governments have to form coalitions. That's what in 2016 it was. They had to do that because it could not run the country because they did not have they had a minority to the electorate. So they had to make a coalition with other parties, like-minded parties, and that way they could run. So, I mean, to me, if I can say, I really think the time has come, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, where we have a population of East Indian and African almost on equal numbers. I really think the time has come to introduce both. And in fact, I would just want to say that the Hugh Wooding Committee and the IATALI Committee recommended two things. They said, let's do a mixed thing. We do the normal first party post for 36 seats. At that time it was 36, so nowadays it will be 41. And then we'll have another 41 seats. And that other 41 seats will be done by how you said, looking down at the list. And when you look at the list, who got the most amount of votes. And in that way, if you have one unicameral, one house, but in that one house, you will have 36 who got elected in the normal way, and the 36 who got elected by the proportional representation. And the voting committee recommended it. The IATALI committee recommended it. And, you know, it's very sad that today we're still doing this bicameral thing because I guess it benefits everyone.
Well, it doesn't benefit the country. The truth is, in a small country like ours, and in New Zealand, which consider themselves a small country, having one house rather than duplicating the exercise, which is what we do, is far better, more economical, efficient, and effective to pass legislation. So I certainly would support the Wooding Commission on having a single house. It's one issue I would like to suggest that I think the independent senators should serve in what we refer to as independent senators, should serve in that single house. Because if you notice, anytime we face a crisis, if you like, a legislative crisis, people say, well, we're looking to the independent senators to see if they will save us.
Right.
They are very crucial, important. That part of our constitution we got right. And we look to these independents to bring a sane, sensible, balanced voice to the parliament. And I would like to save that. Having said I would like to save that, it would be far better if you have an independent president rather than a president that's appointed by a political party, which that's what we really have, no matter how you couch it. And I would like to see the president voted for at the same time as an election by all Republicans. And I would like to see the president have a substantive job, rather than a ceremonial job. A few things, yes, they have a few appointments they can make in their own discretion, but the majority is really the president acts on the advice of cabinet. Now and again has to consult with the opposition, whatever. Which means, whether we like it or not, and I'm not making an attack on any particular president. The president would not be seen to be independent. Whereas if the whole electorate voted for this president, then that president appointing people to be independent senators, to certain commissions, all of those things, a whole string of things that the president has, which are important posts that would come under some, and that's what you need in a constitution. We call that a check and balance. So the executive have some rights, the opposition are there to play their part, but you also, in my view, would have a president who brings some balance to the equation in order to get a better governance system where other voices can be heard.
Yeah.
And I think that would produce for us dramatically changed and different and new and better type of governance structure.
So I think you have answered the reason for referendum is to get the people's opinion on a matter of national importance. An example, whether we should join the Privy Council. Right?
Well, so I'd like to touch on the Privy Council because, to my mind, the problem with if knowing what I know now, it's easy in hindsight to talk about these things. But if what we had done is make, and I would still like to do today, is to have made the Caribbean Court of Justice what we call an originating court for constitutional matters. Right? So constitutional matters would start there. We would still have an appeal to the Privy Council because constitutional matters is really where you get the real fray about whether or not these things are politically influenced, if you like. And then if you did that for a 5-year window, you would have a track record. Did the Privy Council reverse the decision of the CCJ? Were the CCJ perhaps soft on politicians, if that's what you want to say, and the Privy Council were tough on them? You now have some comparison to make where you could go to the people in a referendum and say, all right, and in fact, I believe in much more than a referendum. A referendum did not work well for the UK in terms of Brexit, because what you get is political parties putting their spin on everything. What I believe we should need is what I call a citizens' assembly, where you get independent opinion leaders on a particular position, experts, coming to say what this means, what's the significance, what's the pros, what's the cons. The people listen, they ask questions, and they finally say, well, this is what I think we should do. And then having been educated, if you like, about this issue, you can have a referendum, and at least people will vote having known the pros, the cons, the consequences, and the benefits. And that's the context in which I would like to see a referendum happen. I would like to see, in relation to changing the Privy Council, a lower threshold. When they had this in St. Vincent, I think it was about 2009.
And backfired.
Ralph Gonsalves was very popular.
Yeah, and he's still popular.
The truth is, that was too high. That was too high a threshold for anybody to achieve. And so I would think that 65%, for instance, is the maximum I think that you should require to get maybe even a lower number. You certainly want a majority, of course, but maybe not a simple majority. Between 55 and 65. You need to work out those numbers. Where people have had an understanding of what they're doing. So they make a wise, hopefully, decision.
I asked you one thing before because I was trying to ask questions that I think Dennise would say, well, people, the man in the street should want to know about the Privy Council. They should want to know how well, we hadn't really dealt with how the president is appointed, but it is very political. We didn't deal with that. We dealt with the issue of the referendum. I mentioned to you the issue of the power of recall, whether a person could decide in the middle to leave the party. Well, you explain it. What is
You just can leave the party, but I don't think that's what is intended. I mean, the Crossing of the Floor Act.
That's what I meant, yes.
It is, from my point of view, undemocratic.
Why?
We're really telling people you are compelled to toe the line. And I don't think that that's correct. But in a recall, if you find that your representative is doing nothing, isn't performing, perhaps hasn't been in Parliament, or hasn't taken a sensible vote, or
Misconducted
our
himself.
institutions aren't improving, then you should be entitled to get together and say, provided you have a minimum backing, and say, look, we want a vote on whether this particular candidate should be recalled, and a vote will take place. And again,
what would happen if you do? And if that happens,
in the Senate.
What will happen if it happens? Then would you have a vacancy in Parliament?
Yeah, you will have a by-election, yeah, sure.
And can't he participate in the by-election?
I think there's nothing to stop him from doing that.
He can't. He or she can't.
Depending on whether his party will put him back. One of the things, recall sounds great in theory. If you look down in, and I looked at the dynamics of the legislation that we introduced in the Senate, and in reality, it is not as great a mechanism as you think it would, to achieve. In other words, the thresholds that you have to pass are significant.
Yeah.
As they ought to be. I mean, you don't want to find that. Of course, these things may happen not because your constituents find that you haven't performed. It could just be the opposite political party may want an opportunity again in a bylaw to see if perhaps they could win a majority.
Right.
So you don't want to find that you upset the governance of the country. Just there are a number of balancing issues.
So there is a power recall.
That's why I say the legislation, why it's great in theory about recall, is not as dramatic, at least as drafted, was not as dramatic as perhaps some people might have thought it was.
But Timothy, when I went and looked it up, I couldn't find the act. And then eventually I saw an article that said they were supposed to pass something and they didn't pass it yet. And because they haven't passed it, legally that provision cannot be implemented.
Yeah, that's right. That was the legislation passed in the Senate.
Yes.
It never reached the House of Representatives.
Yes, so it is not valid.
Some people attack me for causing that, but
we won't go into that. But is that true? So it's not valid. It's not valid law now, is it?
No. It was never passed in the House of Representatives.
Right. That's what I want to make sure. So you're saying that
the real crux of the matter, which I certainly would think didn't satisfy me, is the attempt to change the voting system in a way that would really have wiped out the question of third parties. You would forever be faced with the two majority parties we have. And then you go back to the question of, should 23-25% of your population, your voter population, remain unrepresented? And I found that unacceptable. And I didn't, at that stage, had recommended preferential voting. One's voice is not always heard.
Karen,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that Tim is hearing me at all. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, which is why I have not asked any questions. But we're coming I wasn't sure.
I have to run off for 2 minutes. So
Okay.
I will let you wind up with, but I'm going to leave my phone right here so you can wind up with
I
Tim.
can still hear him.
Yeah.
So Tim, if you had to identify 2 ideas that the population should take away from this conversation today, what would that be?
I think a voting precedent would bring tremendous value to the country. I would like that. One of the things that I haven't touched on, because I wasn't asked a question, but I do think that in our Constitution, we have rights and freedoms enshrined in it. What that creates in a society, if you don't have the counterbalance of what are my duties and responsibilities as a citizen, and I would like to see introduced into our Constitution rights and responsibilities that allows for, a transformative action. So, and you have to do, you just don't have it on paper. You have to take that into your education system. You have to make it felt. I remember I tried doing this, and we actually created a mascot to take into the schools. Young children of primary school, they listen more to mascots than they would listen to human beings. And so you could have art and theater and drama and poetry and essays or whatever on this issue. What duties and responsibilities do we see as being important? And then, of course, you try to entrench it once you get an agreed approach to it.
Mhm.
And you need that to carry right through the society. And if we're going to change, I think that's an important segment.
You talked about rights and responsibilities. Could you give us an example of what that would look like? What would be the responsibility that I have as a citizen?
So I have a civic duty to vote. I have a civic duty to seek employment, to be responsible for bringing up my family. I have a responsibility to have as good a family life as I could produce. I have a responsibility not to break the law. I have a responsibility to educate my children, to have the best family life that we can create. I mean, that's just some of the things I threw out.
Yeah.
But I am saying, let the people talk. Let's have another citizens' assembly. So you get consensus about these things. So when you put them into the Constitution, and as I say, it's a living instrument. Because 10 years from now, what I think is important may radically change.
Yes. Tim, there is an article in the Express, I think it goes all the way back to 2017, I think, in which you're quoted as saying that I believe that in order to foster a better participatory democracy in keeping with the philosophical underpinnings of our Constitution, we must find ways to allow citizens to participate in the institutional life of our country, which will in turn engender a sense of belonging and patriotism and so promote nation building. Would you like to just talk a little more about that?
Sure. And that's where the Citizens Assembly comes forward. One of the things, when I was acting as president, I got the opportunity to, very often on Republic Day, the president was abroad. So I got the opportunity to give a talk to the nation. And one of the things I focused on and developed in conjunction with the IRO was a list of, and I chose 12 because they suggested to me, you need one for each month. And we focused on a value. I remember the last value was give thanks, thanksgiving. So often we do that. But it was also be kind, be considerate, be patient. What about on the roads? Drive properly. And we had a list of 12. And then, of course, beyond that, and that's where I introduced. I actually had videos done. I had music introduced. I got calypsos and support. And said, we could do that. Music touches the soul like nothing else. And we have there, multiples of that in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are losing the advantage. So imagine if the concepts we're talking about here could be brought into calypso. So it touches the soul of people. Can you imagine how we would dramatically have the opportunity of changing values, of changing ways, which, based on what is happening today, many of us think we're going in the wrong direction. But if you want to reset the button, you have to do something positive. We just can't stand back on the sidelines and moan and groan about what is happening. We need our governments to say, hey, we're going to take proactive steps in order to achieve that. We're going to carry this into schools. We want character education. We want civics taught in the schools. We want children to do community service. I know that had to do community service if they wanted to graduate. a minimum number of hours. They had to get the NGO to sign off on it that they had done it, was they couldn't graduate.
Yep.
Why couldn't we have that system in our schools where people understand it's not just taking, it's giving. And if we don't inculcate that into the culture, then go back to your rights and freedoms. Everybody is me. I'm entitled to this and I'm entitled to
But
that.
didn't the Constitution tell you you have that? Didn't the Constitution tell you you have rights and freedoms?
Yes.
No, and I'm counterbalance that with duties and responsibilities. That's the point I was making.
So my big takeaway from this conversation today, as we come to an end, Tim, has to do with those duties and responsibilities. And the other thing that for me is an excellent takeaway is find a way so that we can elect our president and give our president a term of reference, some things that that president has to deliver, not just a ceremonial president. So I look forward to chatting with you again on this matter and similar matters. Thank you very much, Tim.
Absolutely, I appreciate you inviting me. Sorry we had this sort of difficulty of communicating. But it really was enjoyable. Welcome another opportunity.
Yes, and I do want to invite you back again because I didn't get a chance because it would have taken too long. So we really have to have you back. But I wanted to deal with the issue which Hayatali and the commission, voting commission dealt with. And actually, I sat down and wrote out from the voting commission, from paragraph 25, if you're interested, dealing with the whole separation of powers idea and the power of the executive and the reality of our situation as compared to England from which we inherited. But we don't have the time, but we have to have you back again so we can have a fulsome discussion on it. I think we will have different ways of doing it.
All right, that's great, Karen. I love the opportunity. It might be useful, the voting commission developed a booklet where it explained to the layman, what is this provision about? What are your options? What questions do you have? If you have access to that, it was a tremendous booklet. And it's really a pity that Trinidad has not advanced along those lines. But perhaps, another occasion would allow us to take this closer.
Please.
Yes. Thank you very much, Tim. And
thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. And we now move on to our next guest, who is in the studio. And welcome, Nikolai Edwards. Thank you very much for being here with us.
My absolute pleasure. Are you hearing me?
Dennise, can you excuse me for 2 more minutes again?
Yes, Karen. Yes, Karen.
I needed the phone to do what I have to do.
Yes, Karen. Thank you. Welcome, Nikolai. I like to start this by asking people a little difficult question. Is there something that we don't know about you that you'd like to share?
Let me think. All right. I think for most of my life, I've lived it out in the public sphere, all my accomplishments, all the quirky things, but something that you all don't know. I don't know. Okay, so I have a business. This was something that I started out of secondary school. Well, when I was younger, coming out of secondary school, I enjoyed parties. At that time, you could imagine leaving secondary school at around 16. There wouldn't have been very many parties that I could have attended. So the few that I went to, I enjoyed it. So much so that I started promoting events. And the first one was called Libra. It took place on my birthday, October 16th. And since then, there were a lot of people who reached out to me, asked me to do another event. I did that for some time. When we had the state of emergency back in 2011, I actually had a huge event planned for which was going to take place on San Fernando Hill. And well, I mean, we understand what took place there. So I started off as a party promoter coming out of secondary school. And in recent years, I've done some more of those kinds of events, usually around my birthday, but just other lines, hikes, a picnic in the Botanic Garden, a yacht party. So I do like events. I like hosting. I like having friends over and so on. So I guess that's something that people may not necessarily know unless you know me on a personal level.
Yeah. And I'm really happy to hear that you like events, because event management and event planning in this country is extremely important.
Yes.
And so that someone like you doing events, I think that is absolutely wonderful. So that's just the start of this afternoon's interaction. Nicola, I read something about you that you represented 1 billion youths. Tell me
1.2
about that.
billion, as a matter of fact. So when I in 2015, I would have tossed my hat in the ring for the election to the Commonwealth Youth Council. At that point, I was running for vice chairperson, policy, advocacy, and projects. That was quite a journey to get to that point. One of the things that I had a challenge with was funding for my ticket, because you got accepted as a candidate and you had to fly to Malta. And not many people know where Malta is, even except Malta, probably at Carib. That's the Malta most people know about. But here I had to fly halfway around the world to attend this election. And I was successful, emerging as vice chair, policy, advocacy, and projects. And that 9-member council, the largest youth council in the entire world, I had the opportunity to sit there, the only Trini to ever be on that council at that point. And since then, some other Trinis who I have encouraged to join and to get involved, they have made it onto that council. But at that point, based on the number of Commonwealth countries that we had and the population of youth, it was 1.2 billion young people that we had the responsibility of implementing programs and projects and trying to represent the youth voice. So it really was a pleasure to serve there from 2015 to 2018.
So
I want to give a little joke, Dennise. When you said about Malta, I went to Malta about a month ago because I was in England, but I was just going for a weekend. It's cheap. If you're in England, you could jump the thing. So I didn't really want to go anywhere. I'm like looking for somewhere to go that I had to think. And she said, well, let's go Malta. I said, but where's Malta? She don't know where Malta is. I don't know where Malta is. We had to take a map and look for Malta.
You think she was taking you for a drink?
She herself did not know where Malta was. So I found out where Malta is, and it's not only a drink.
Yes, it is.
No. Beautiful country.
Absolutely. Country. But Nikolai, what we're here today to talk about is the Constitution in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. And as a youth, how important is the Constitution to you?
I think it is extremely important. And of course, let me on the onset acknowledge that in some quarters and so forth, I wouldn't be considered an average youth. So I want to make the distinction between Nikolai as a young person, appreciating and understanding the Constitution and the role that it plays in my life on a daily basis almost, compared to the thoughts of young people who themselves are not aware of what is in the Constitution. And because of being so far removed from their daily lives, at least in thought, they don't see the importance of the Constitution. It's really an afterthought. But because of the things that I'm involved in, youth advocacy, really trying to push a youth voice and looking especially for avenues through which there can be a more permanent or long-lasting or sustaining youth voice or youth involvement, the Constitution is one of those documents that I turn to so that we as young people can really have a space and a place when it comes to how we organize society. So it's very important to me.
Give me an example.
I would ask him that, Dennise. He said when he was a young person, he thought one way, and now he's an older person and in positions he's taken, he understands the Constitution a different way. So I would like to hear, because I guess what Dennise really wants to reach out to, I know she's passionate about the youth. I think she wants to reach out to the younger you and to see if you could get what would make the younger you have recognized that the Constitution was important. They didn't have to wait till the older youth.
Sure. As a young person, you aspire to things. That's how we function as a society. The older generations, your parents, your grandparents, they push you to aspire to things, whatever those may be. It may be, in some cases, to take up a profession such as a teaching job or that of a doctor or lawyer. And in other cases, some of us aspire to things such as politics and the highest office in the country. So as a young person in social studies, you're in your primary school class and so on, you're being asked, what do you want to aspire to? And there are many other young persons who would say, I want to be the president, I want to be the prime minister. But you don't know actually what goes in to getting into those roles. So we have it as this kind of mysterious thing. And it's only when you actually start to get older and you think about, okay, if this is a serious aspiration of mine, how do I go about this? What are the rules? What are the regulations? And therefore, you turn to the Constitution to understand that process, to understand eligibility, to understand what powers the Prime Minister or the President may have. And so it became very important for me to see that document really as a guide for future aspirations. And so it is within that context, having the benefit, really and truly, the opportunity to serve as an independent senator in this country. One of the first documents that I had to refer to was the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, because prior to me turning 25, I would not have been eligible to sit as a senator, temporary or otherwise, in our country's Senate. So by understanding even, let's say, the thinking behind that, not agreeing with it necessarily, but it puts things into context. So that was that transition from, as a young person, not caring or thinking about the Constitution or its impact, to you're getting older, having to think seriously about your life decisions and the direction that you want to head into, and having to consult this document in a sense to determine if this is in fact right for you.
So would you, if you had the opportunity, would you change that age requirement that you had to be at least 25 to become a senator? Would you change that?
Of course, because one wonders what is the difference in terms of thinking between the 18-year-old who is eligible to sit as a member of the lower house versus that of a 25-year-old, that 7-year difference. What is the difference? Why does one get the opportunity to enter in at 18 versus another at 25, when in both cases you are there to make law, you are there to legislate, to give your contributions and so on. And of course, one would understand that it's a more difficult or more tedious task to get in at the lower house, because you have to consult with members of the public, you have to put yourself up for a general election and so on, and of course jump through various hoops in various political parties to get to that point even self. Whereas with a Senate appointment, we understand that it will be based on the discretion of the Prime Minister or the opposition leader or the President in the three different benches. And at the end of the day, one asks, and I've been asked this question many, many times, what qualifications do you have to have in order to be a senator or in order to be a member of parliament? And quite frankly, it's really the age requirement and the fact that you have to be a resident of Trinidad and Tobago for at least the past number of years. Beyond that, it's not to say that you have to have a master's degree, an undergraduate degree, or anything of that sort. So if we were to keep things all the same, and change the age requirement alone, I see no reason or no argument for us retaining that age requirement. Now, if we were to look in the context of representation, having a more rigid process or criteria for one to undergo, then I can see age playing a factor, save and except for the cases where, because we are advancing, we know that a 15-year-old is not going to have a master's degree. But if you want that kind of a conversation to take place in the Senate surrounding academics or an academia kind of approach, you would expect a person who is a lot more experienced. So it's much less about age than it is about experience. So I see those.
Can I interject, the lawyer in me?
Sure.
I could give you two reasons why. I'm not saying they shouldn't consider changing it. Let me just start by that. What I do know, I've heard from medical people that, especially young people who develop bipolar disorder and all kinds of mental disorders, they say usually it happens in their mid-20s. And that's because up to 25, your brain has not continued, it's still growing physiologically. I don't think I made that up. I've heard it from too many people who should know what they're talking about. But that's not the real reason. I think the difference is that the person that you make a senator has a certain degree of prestige and stature. And what is saying is that person is considered to be somewhat of an, not necessarily expert, but an intellectual, a certain level of maturity, a maturity of thinking. So we're looking to you now when we send up a bill to the house from the House for you to use that that superior, I think, a knowledge and ability, which age often goes with it. Then maybe that's the reason. I'm not saying it should not be changed, but I'm just saying that perhaps, and I'm not saying it's magically at 25 you become an intellectual thing, but I'm just saying I think maybe what they really want to say to you is we want a certain level of intellectual and maturity of the person that sits in the Senate.
Like and jumping off.
Like
jumping off. but even jumping off of that point, the 18-year-old of today versus the 18-year-old of 1962 or 1976 is far different, and one should pat themselves on the back as a society to congratulate ourselves that the 18-year-olds of today are not like the 18-year-olds of yesterday. It means that we've put in the work. It means that to some extent GATE has paid off. It means that investments in education and young people is paying off to some degree. So why aren't young people being given those opportunities to show what they have learned, to show the evolution of what youth is in Trinidad and Tobago and the contributions? I am continuously astonished by young people's contributions in this country. We see young people traveling, raising the red, white, and black flag across this world, but yet for some reason they're not good enough to stand in our own corridors of power and represent our interests here at home. So that's the thing that is kind of baffling. I completely understand your point, but my counter to that is that we're in a different time. The mindset of young people are quite different. And I think that for those reasons, especially, we definitely need to reconsider those age limits when it comes to appointments in this country.
There's another reason I want to reconsider it, and that is if an 18-year-old can vote, then why can't an 18-year-old be in parliament as a senator? Why can't an 18-year-old be on a board? And we have enough opportunities to be able to get our 18-year-olds to participate. But Karen, something that you triggered me with is when you talked about, someone who has experience and they have esteem and all of that. That is the problem we have. I'm not
saying that. Wait. Just I get myself in trouble when I say these things. I am saying that is what I believe that those who were making the decision had in mind. That's not Karen Tesheira saying that's what she believes. Saying that those who did it, that was what they had in mind in doing that.
And Karen, thank you for clarifying it. And I am just making the point that if that is what they had in their mind, come on, get rid of it. So let's come back to the Constitution.
Yes, I want to hear his thoughts on it.
The Constitution, Nikolai. One of the issues in the Constitution for me is that our politicians remain in office for too long. So I think that there should be a requirement that their term of office ends after maybe 10 years or 2 terms, and then you move on. How do you feel about that?
So I do believe that though we should look toward term limits in this country, and of course built in that is the time of those terms, each of those terms. I do think that 2 terms is sufficient enough, and it's not so much of a glorified career that we should be considering politics to be. It's one of those altruistic approaches that I wish people would take in a sense where it really is about service to your fellow countrymen, ensuring that you make a contribution but being fully aware that making a contribution does not mean that it has to be this permanent contribution or you have to have this permanent position. The average young person now does not look to stay in a job until the age of retirement. If you compare the data from years ago to present, you would see on average that young people will change jobs throughout, whether it's a 30-year career span or what have you, several times in comparison to our parents and grandparents who may during their entire lifetime switch between two jobs. So those trends, I think, definitely should be taken on board as young people aspire to politics, as young people aspire to hold office in this country, whether it's office within the judiciary, whether it's office in the legislature, the executive, what have you. We really do need to understand global trends, understand why or what is the motivation behind these things. And our constitution and our laws in the country should be reflective of the society and to some extent the time. Of course, you're not going to constantly tweak a constitution or laws every year or every 2 years or even every 5 years. But the reality is that we have to be able to have a proper built-in mechanism by which we can ventilate these issues and have them become a part of our laws in this country if need be, because of course we understand that policy plays an important role in how we organize society as well. It's not just the legislation, that's just part of it. So with that kind of thinking, I do see us really galvanizing this kind of run-of-ray horse that we tend to think as politicians as, where from the time they get in, that's it there. We are going to, because to be quite honest, the idea that a politician brags that he or she has been in office for 20 years and 30 years and so forth is quite a turn off for a young person. I'm not sure how other people feel, but that's not something to brag about. It means that you're stagnant. It means that you have nowhere else to go. Because I could very well imagine a Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's something I would support, after you have left from that office, whether it's the Prime Minister, the President, after you've left from that office, it shouldn't be that you are at the age of retirement and now going home to cock up your foot and play with the grandchildren and see about all of that. No, you should still be at an age where CARICOM Secretary General, Commonwealth Secretary General, United Nations Secretary, there should be still some level of upward mobility after you have left the office, because we are not saying that when you have left office, you have left and there is nothing more that you can contribute, whether it's to the country, to the region, or on the international stage. And I feel as though politicians tend to, or people who aspire to politics in this country, they tend to see politics as being the be-all and end-all. So that's at the end of my career, after I have established myself as a lawyer, as a doctor, as a businessman, I've done well. Now I have to look for something else to kind of end off my time with. And it seems as though politics is the most attractive. That kind of thinking, we really have to do away with it.
I don't know how we can do away with it with the current administrations that we have, because currently our politicians have been, a lot of them have been in there for 15 to 20 years, some of them even more than that. And to me, you're absolutely spot on when you talk about that being a politician should not be a permanent job. It is something that you do for a period, you give to your society for a period, and then you transition to something else. Karen, you wanted to say something?
No, I just know that I think differently from a lot of what Nikolai has said, and because I have definitely a different perspective. I think the reason why you should have 2 terms only under our democratic republican system, unlike, say, Dubai or Singapore, which was able to progress that much because they really had what you'd call it was benevolent. It certainly was not a democracy, and they were able to achieve dictators, and they were able to achieve what they achieved because you had one leader for a significant number of years so that things could be accomplished. The problem in Trinidad in particular, and has become more so, is that anything that you set out to do, whether it's build a highway, build a school, build a hospital, or what you have this large thing. As soon as a change in government, that project is stalled, it's stopped, or it's just because it's not your idea and you don't want them to get any praise for having it done. I think the reason why the prime minister should be limited to 2 terms, as in Guyana, because of the power a prime minister has under the Westminster model of government, which that is a whole discussion we could have. And in fact, the Wooding Commission, yes, the old people who talked about it, and Hayatali also talked about it, and they are the ones that introduced the Integrity Commission into Trinidad. That's the Hayatali Commission. They are the ones that did that. But they are the ones that criticize our continued political system, the Westminster system. And because he said, in fact, the Westminster system, I actually wrote it down from what they had said. They're talking about just taking it and bringing it into a small society where everybody knows everybody, and where there's a lot of patronage, a lot of et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In England, you have in the cabinet 22 cabinet positions and 15 cabinet ministers. Then you have junior ministers. You have 650 MPs. You think a prime minister could have the power that a prime minister in Trinidad has? A prime minister in Trinidad and Tobago, that's not he. The Constitution has given him so much power of appointment, power of dismissal, power of effective appointing the president. And by the way, the president has to do, Section 80 says that when the cabinet, and that means and you know the head of the cabinet is running that show, when the cabinet gives a directive to the president, she shall act on the advice of the cabinet. So when you have in a small country like ours, and in fact that is what this is what they said. I want to just read it out for you. He talked about the British Parliament Prime Minister has powerful constraints, powerful interest groups, a vigorous press, and alert public opinion. The British public has a high degree of confidence and influencing policy and vigorous academic groups. It cannot be said that of Trinidad and Tobago. If anything, the political culture is highly bureaucratic. No entrenched traditions and involvement of the better off in society. Those who can make permanent comments, for most part, have been silenced or grumble in private. The reasons are tremendous patronage enjoyed by the state. 33% of the state employees are now, and apart from the public service, you also have the state like WASA, TSTT, all the state-owned enterprises, which they either own or they have an interest in. So the largest employer in the country, and they are government representatives on different boards, in which the state has acquired an interest. OCM, TV6, Express, they're on that board. They wanted to put two more members on that board. And all the persons are directly appointed from the prime. Oh yes, he says, which state has acquired, all appointed directly from the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Appointment of the Chief Justice, Auditor General, the DPA, the Registrar General. Yes. So he says the use of patronage, universal, but in small societies such as ours, is terribly effective. Ambitious intelligence can often be persuaded that the difference or cooperation is the path to follow. And so they're saying that basically in Trinidad and Tobago, we do not have 650 members of parliament where the prime minister cannot exercise the power he can exercise over his cabinet. He can put them as backbenchers tomorrow morning if they fall out of thing. So the reason why the prime minister, not the other ministers, the prime minister should not serve more than 2 terms is because of the tremendous power which he has under our Westminster model. And therefore this idea that the legislature and the executive are separate in Trinidad is a fallacy. It's impossible because the cabinet is the legislature, right? And the other thing I want to correct you with the judiciary, the greatest protection we have, and Montesquieu spoke about it when he talked about political liberty. The greatest protection, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, is the independence of the judiciary. And once a member of the judiciary is under a term of office and feels that his office, they're up to 70, as it is in most countries now, and they can be removed at the women fancy of a politician or prime minister, then they will not be independent and ensure that we have a democratic republic. So when it comes to our judiciary, they stay there until they reach 70 years of age. That is our assurance. And when it comes to the prime minister, you get him out after 2 terms because he has too much power.
Karen, you're saying that our judiciary is independent, and that seems, for me, that's another discussion that we're supposed to have, because that's not what I think.
And I will tell you that unfortunately, I also agree with you, and I have good reason in many instances to know.
I thought we'd have an argument about that, Karen.
No, but I would not you see the whole country is corrupt.
Yes, Karen.
Corrupt. So,
but I don't want to be sued. I don't want to be sued. So
you're not calling a name. You're calling an organ, and we're not calling. And there are how many of them in the judiciary? But that is why they don't want to get rid of the Privy Council. I have said it. I was the Auditor General. So I said I want that to go to the Privy Council.
So, Karen, that's a question that I wanted to ask Nikolai. That do you think that we should have the Privy Council, or should we be having the Justice?
I think that the longer we continue to have the Privy Council as our final court of appeal, it's an insult to our intelligence, literally an insult to our intelligence, because it demonstrates that we are not confident in our ability as a people, and this extends beyond Trinidad and Tobago regionally. We're not confident in our ability to make determinations on matters that affect us. So the highest court of appeal, you have to literally jump on a plane and go into someone else's country and have these matters tried, when right in your front yard. And in Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, it's very embarrassing, highly, highly embarrassing that we have the Caribbean Court of Justice right in our front yard. We pass it in Port of Spain on our way to work and whatnot, and that's not our final court of appeal. And we had taken up the responsibility of housing this institution here. We would have supported the creation of the institution, but not its being placed as our final court of appeal. So that is very concerning, and we see politicians using it as a political football back and forth. And one wonders, well, why can't we simply go the route of it? Let's have that debate in Parliament. Let the wolf in sheep's clothing come forward and show their face, because we continue to talk about it from platform to platform across the media, in editorials and stuff. And I'm talking about the persons who actually sit in office, who have the opportunity as a legislator to debate this issue. Why can't we bring it forward and debate it? Because there is interest among the population. There is interest among various groups in this country. And one of the things we constantly hear is that the reason why we're not embarking on that just as yet is because there will not be opposition support for the legislation, or the bill rather, for us to have that as the final court of appeal. That has been one of those long-standing.
Let me disabuse your mind a little bit.
Sure.
The reason why no one questions the intellectual capacity of our judges. The CCJ, the head of the CCJ, Adrian Saunders, is highly, highly respected. Maureen Rajnaut Lee, another member, Raj Kumar. Our judges, there are many of our judges who are highly, highly respected. The reason there is that reluctance is because when it comes to matters of a political nature, there is a feeling that and we have had the experience where matters have been decided by our court of appeal, and when they have gone to the Privy Council has had to overturn it. And when they have overturned it, they have had a few words to say about it. I can give you one more recent example with the local government, when they wanted to extend the office of the local councils from 3 years to 4 years. And the Privy Council took them to task and said, it is not for you or the Parliament, it is for the electorate in a democratic republic to make that decision. Thank God for the Privy Council. When they had that issue with the Bail Act, when they were saying that you could not get bail for murder, it is true that you will hardly get it, and they gave you the explanation. You can't get it in England, but we have the common. I don't want to go through all the legalese in it, but the point is that they overturned the decision and said that it will hardly ever be exercised in a case of murder. But the common law, which we inherited by our savings clause in our independent constitution and thereafter our Republican constitution, you can get bail. That's 2 examples. I'll give you a 3rd example.
Oh, gosh, Karen.
No, because what I'm trying to tell him, it's like not. I know many of the judges who sit on the court. Many of them are my colleagues. Many of them, and many of them are first class. Have the first class. Many of them have. Well, one of them is in the Caribbean Court of Appeal. But have gone to Oxford University and have a first class from Oxford and Cambridge. So when you want to talk about intellectual ability, I will really take, because then you're saying the law school from which they graduated is substandard.
No,
And
Karen, I think you've taken it. Karen. Sometimes you just have to calm down, Karen.
No, but I'm saying to him that the reason for the reluctance to abolish the Caribbean Privy Council, because I've had friends of mine who are lawyers who have tried to get me to jump on board, and I've said, I agree with them with it. This whole thing with the you can't put anybody to the death penalty after 5 years because of the Pratt and Morgan case. And in fact, they were almost like England legislating law for us, and we are independent country and all of that sort of thing. So that was, in fact, Michael de Labastide wrote an article on that. He was so incensed that they did that. So I understand the thing with the Privy Council, but I think the reason why people are afraid is because they believe that when the Privy Council rules on matters of a constitutional or political nature, that they feel that they will get real justice. They do not have the confidence which they should have in our courts.
I don't think that is the argument, respectfully. Those points would be echoed within certain echelons of society that you've put forward. Those who are members of the legal fraternity, those who are well-learned, academics, and so on. The average conversation when it comes to the abolition of the Privy Council in favor for the Caribbean Court of Justice centers more around the idea of corruption. Because of how close the proximity of these individuals. This is literally your neighbor. You can go down the street and the president of the court and so on. That's the idea that a lot of people have had in their head because of these kinds of political conversations on political platforms, the fear-mongering, the discussions that I think have absolutely no place in an intelligent conversation or even a common sense conversation as to why we should go the direction of the Caribbean Court of Justice. So it's not to say that those arguments that you've put forward, Karen, aren't those ones that are taking place within certain spaces and among the decision makers especially. But if you look at it on a lower level, the average citizen, he or she does not know about these decisions that are coming out of the Privy Council. They don't go up onto these websites and download the case briefs and all of these things. And so they don't have that kind of intimate knowledge of the issues, and far less for reading or paying attention to the news.
So why do they not support it then? So your reason that they don't support it is because...
Right, so because there have been politicians who have jumped on platforms and put into their minds reasons why they should not go down that route.
Why do you say that you disagree with that the Caribbean Court of Justice, that we should go to the Caribbean Court of Justice and we should abolish the Privy Council as the final appellate court? Why do you feel, what are the reasons you believe that the man in the street believes, not just the ones who go to meetings. There are lots of people who do not go to political meetings or listen to political anything. Just the man in the street, the man in the maxi taxi. Why do you feel he in Trinidad and Tobago is reluctant to abolish the Privy Council as the final court of appeal? Why
So two things. One, not because one does not attend a political meeting does not mean that he or she will not be affected by what comes out or what is said on those platforms. We live in an age of social media. We live with people in our homes who will pay attention, and then while we're having breakfast, lunch, or dinner, are bringing up these things as discussion points.
What are the points? What are the reasons then?
So see the points that I mentioned insofar as corruption as being the biggest threat, the biggest reason. We have heard time and time again that politicians, and I'm not going to name any politicians, but we have heard politicians jump on platforms and say that it is not worth supporting the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court of appeal because we have corruption reigning throughout the region. I am not picking this out of my head or deciding on these things. This is a fact.
Well, we agree with each other, Nikolai. That is what I said.
Although we're agreeing with each other, Karen, you were saying, Karen, that we need to continue the Privy Council. And Nikolai is saying, no, we need the Caribbean Court of Appeal.
No.
Our final court. Is that what you're saying? Or am I getting it wrong?
What I responded to was he talked about the intellectual capacity. People question the intellectual capacity of our judges. So I took no. He did say that. Please, he did say that.
And I see that.
Let me just finish my point. So when you said that as being a reason, I took great exception to it for a number of reasons that I pointed out. Then I recognize the reason why persons do not want to abolish the Privy Council for the examples that I gave, that when the Privy Council rules on a matter and goes against what our Court of Appeal has said on a matter that involves the Constitution, therefore the government, you hear they overturn the decision of our Court of Appeal, and that does not give you confidence that our judges have sufficient independence when you see them being in one case, a person who ended up at the Court of Appeal, who I won't call, but they actually took her to task in a judgment and actually took her to task in a judgment. So I have been asked many times, Karen, would you support the CCG? I said, I want to, but I had to go to the Privy Council with my matter. And I will tell you the truth, Nikolai. My matter was not political because I was not involved in politics at all. But the reason I was glad that I went to the Privy Council, because I wanted, at the end of the day, when I got judgment, the defendants could not say, oh, it's because she was a minister of finance, or because she teach at law school, or because she teach most of them judges, or because she know everybody in the legal fraternity. Nobody knew me in the Privy Council. So whatever decision they made, I was glad for it for my personal reasons. But then I think, Dennise, that we should give it a chance, because I say, look at Guyana. Ghana has the same concerns of race, people concerned about race in the politics. And yet a long time ago, Guyana abandoned the Privy Council and they have upheld their the last elections. The CCJ ruled on it. They have also Barbados has gone to this CCJ, and the death penalty cases, they have not followed what the Privy Council has been ruling. And they ruled Adrian Saunders was the lead and went against. And in fact, the Privy Council had to quote the CCJ in their own judgment. So it is not, this is not that I'm against it. I'm just concerned. That's
okay. And I hear that, Karen. But there's one point that I want before we end, because we are going to wrap up in another 10 or 12 minutes. Yes, we are.
It was good conversation, man.
It has been a wonderful conversation, but it has an end. It ends at 6 o'clock. Nikolai,
I have an important question I need to ask. When I look at what goes on in the English government or the parliament and stuff, especially when I look at the House of Commons and stuff, apparently the people who are calling the shots, the people who are in control, they are not so much in control because it seems as though there's a sort of oversight body that controls the executive power. Should we be electing a Senate as an oversight body for the governance? If I should put it quickly in a short kind of way, if you understand what I'm saying, because
somebody, a body or organization, you say.
yes, because what is happening now, these people are appointees. And I think we have a big problem with these people being appointed by whoever and whoever. They're saying Trinidad is who you know and who you don't know. And the same corruption you guys are talking about. Should we now be electing presidents and senatorial representatives?
That's one of the things that they've, one of the suggestions that has been made.
Yeah, I do think that it may not necessarily be a case that we have to go down the route of electing a Senate if certain conditions exist. And those are specifically the qualifications of the individuals along with a process for selection. Because what I would personally like to see as part of our Senate would be persons who come from various backgrounds or sectors that are appointed or nominated rather by those sectors themselves. So if we're talking about labor representatives, we have to have a very cohesive process by which the labor movement can elect a person as being, this is our representative or nominating that individual, so that we have a Senate that is more reflective of the diversity of our society and the various sectors and so on. So if those conditions were to exist, I would be fully in support of the continued appointment, in a sense,
like
of
subject matter experts then.
Yeah,
like the subject matter experts then, in a sense.
But that is what currently exists, because one says when the president appoints or the prime minister, and you hear even them reading out bios and stuff, that they present them as subject matter experts in these areas. So that exists in that sense. But who determines that this is the best subject matter expert in this field? It should not be at the whim and fancy of an individual. It should be as a result of some level of caucusing, some groups coming together who are representative of this particular sector. And I think that will augur well for our democracy if we were to implement a system similar to that.
They do that with the industrial court, with some of the judges. 3 of the judges are elected by the labor movement, 3 by the private sector, and 3 by the government, and so on.
You see, it is for even that reason that I have a particular level of confidence in our ability as a people of Trinidad and Tobago to really do the right things. We should be able to, when we look at our constitution, when we look at our parliament and our judiciary, we should not be thinking that we have to have an organization, an institution rather, that is reflective of that which we are seeing in some other developed country. We should be asking ourselves what works best for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, considering our climate, considering our environment. I'm not talking about the physical environment and climate, of course, but rather when we look at the issues in society, when we look at how we treat with things in society, we have systems, cultural systems that have over the years really been done away that can have some level of benefit to our society. As crazy and as far-fetched as this may sound, the idea of susu, for instance, because that came out as a way of, people coming together, pooling their resources. You hold this hand this time around thing. And that is illegal in Trinidad and Tobago. But why not do we build upon that and understand that there is some level of benefit?
Excellent.
So whether we have an agreed contract that anyone who enters into a SUSU should be able to use this and it is binding and so on, we need to support the things that have worked well for us in this country, not abolish it in favor of things that have worked well for other people in other places.
But they did lead to the penny bank, and then the first citizens at unit trust, because those were all the organizations for the, not the up and coming. You couldn't get into the other in certain
Karen, that was the case. That was the case.
Yes, I agree.
But right now, the whole banking sector doesn't work in the interest of people who are poor.
No, absolutely.
So many people in the non-banking sector.
I agree with them.
So that didn't work.
Dennise, I want to tell you, I agree with you. Like just saying that I
Yeah.
understand
Okay.
that
So,
I
Karen,
understand the Susu thing.
so Karen,
Mhm.
our 6 minutes to go.
Oh, God,
Nikolai,
this
my
got
question,
time for you know. God.
my question to you is, how do you feel about our first past the post system
Yeah.
as the electoral?
Yeah, that's a
So of course, when we look at tradition, we understand the reason for seeking a majority. We want to ensure that the majority of society have come together and they have said that this individual, this party, this group, or what have you, best represents the society as a whole. We understand the thinking in it. Has it worked for us well over the years? Not necessarily. And so I see things such as ranked choice voting and so on as being able to give us a lot more rich information about the level of support that individuals have. We have to also do things, and I think this is a more important exercise, because we think when the results have been announced that that's it. So we close up shop, we know the EBC released the results, that's it. But what about exit polling? What about the idea of understanding where support comes from across society and what that candidate ideally looks like or has been traditionally over time? So we need to look at more proportional representation in terms of, and I gave the example of in the Senate, having it be more reflective of the society, implementing a process that we can all agree to. And I think it has to be really and truly the same when it comes to our lower house, because what we have had over the years was a domination, this duopoly of both the People's National Movement and the United National Congress. And one may think, who belongs to one of those parties, that that is so great because it means the people love us. It means that we represent a certain segment of the society and so on. But this cult kind of attitude and behavior, I think it actually undermines democracy, because we have this false sense that these two are the best and no one else deserves a chance. But if we were to look at proportional representation, if we were to look at other means of electing our officials, I think it would augur well for us. And I think people will be more interested in the political process, that electoral process, as opposed to now.
think so. Yeah, I think, and also to what it really does, proportional representation means that it's first past the post means, you know, even though numerically you may have had more votes than the party that is the government because of the first past the post system, right? What it does, it shuts out nearly half of the country, and unfortunately, our voting is along racial lines, so it shuts out whichever racial group won or lost, and that should not be how it should be. We should all be represented, and the representation should be in accordance with some sort of apportionment. The voting committee had recommended, I mentioned it. Voting committee had at that time there were 36 seats, but now there are 41, of course. So what they recommended that you have 41 seats that you would do the normal first past the post. And then you'd have the other 4 done like how they do in the local government election. In other words, they have a list, and then who got the most would then get a certain percentage of seats in the parliament. So the parliament would reflect all the people. It would really be a democracy.
Yeah.
I think that's where we should go. You
Well,
asked that question, madam.
Well, I just wanted to add some more stuff. I know we have just a couple more minutes, 2 more minutes, but some of the things that I wanted to really put forward, I think that there has to be really this package of changes that has to take place in order for any constitutional change to really be effective. It has to work in tandem with some other changes. I do believe that we should have a fixed date for election, because it takes the guesswork out of it. It takes the surprise and all of this nonsense that may have been very interesting and exciting to audiences back when, but today it's very tiring. And the idea of at any point in time this election, it doesn't work for us. Along with that, I do think that we should have a period of transition that is built into our constitution. It shouldn't be that you have an election Monday morning and then Wednesday the government changes. That is what leads
Tuesday changes. I can tell you from experience.
And so I do think that we need to allow the incoming government to really spend some time understanding, well, these are the soldiers who would have been able to make it past that finish line that we have to work with now. How can we really put them in positions that would be of the greatest benefit to Trinidad and Tobago? But also, now that the election is over and there is confidence by the population that we are the ones best to serve, now I can start having conversations with certain persons who prior to the election I could not have conversations with because they don't want to get involved in politics, this, that, and the other. But now I can have that conversation and say, I would like you to be my Minister of Education. I would like you to be my Minister of this, that, and the other. And then we present that information to the public to have some sort of a period of feedback and so on. All of these things augur well for our democracy. Beyond that, really quickly, well, I know we spoke, well, there was some discussion about separation of powers.
We need to have you back. No, I'm serious. You and Tim Hammond-Smith, because I don't think we finished the discussion. It's such an important discourse. I think we should have you back.
So, Nikolai, between now and when we have you back, what are two things you want us to remember from this afternoon with you?
Yeah, because we need to have you back.
Sure. Well, the important thing is that when we think about the population in which this constitution really has to govern over, it is quite different from the population of 1962, 1976, and so on. And that should be predominantly the conversation about how can we really draft a constitution that is reflective of the needs and so on of the society, not just today, but into the future as well, because there has to be some level of room for future changes to be in a less chaotic manner, in a way that it does not go to the benefit or the prize of a particular political party, but rather a routine exercise that the country as a whole undergoes, regardless of who is in office, which political party, and so on. And those are things that I may not have the answers to right now, but I think that the population, we have academics, we have institutions, and they need to design with consultation, of course, what those systems are. The next and final thing is that I do think that how we view politics in this country, it has to change significantly. And I think with that change, it will bring forward a new breed, a new crop of politicians, because the thinking will not be, let me go in there to last as long as I possibly can, or it should be an afterthought after I have made my name in these different fields or careers. Now I can turn to politics. I think that younger and younger people should be getting involved in politics for the purpose of raising their voice, representing their communities, and really painting a picture of what a future can look like after we have made those investments in GATE, in youth, in sport, in all of these things. And of course, we know these things are underfunded in the scheme of things, but the money that we have put into it, let us now start to reap the benefits of that in a way that is constructive and positive for society. Not just because we have to hold persons by their throat and say, well, you spend all this money going and studying education, what you're doing for it now. Many young people want to put that to use, but the opportunities are few and far apart, save and except if you are going down the route of entrepreneurship or flying outside of Trinidad and Tobago, because outside of that, the professions that you have to get into, they are very saturated. I think because of a misalignment of priorities, a mismanagement of certain resources, and really and truly lack of consultation and continued consultation, monitoring and evaluation. Had we had those things in place, we would have been in a much better position by now.
Thank you very much, Nikolai, and I look forward to inviting you again and spending another afternoon having this wonderful conversation with you. Thank you, Karen. Goodbye.
I'm just watching this clock that hasn't moved.
I think you guys should not wait too long to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I don't think we should wait too long, actually.
Yes, I think we should invite these two gentlemen as soon as possible to come.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so, especially since Dennise, we'll have that conversation.
Yes, I know Nikolai very well. I know Nikolai in the
democratic discussion.
I know Nikolai has not seen me, but I've met him many times on the streets, and I always tell him this. Remember me, David McIntyre? I took your number.
Yes.
Yes, I'm very interested in what you are saying.
You see how you're giving us extra minutes, Dennise? Dennise, you see how you
It's
give us
I
extra
need to
minutes?
go.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to it again.
Right.
Goodbye.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dennise and Karen and Mr. Hamilsmith, and of course, Nikolai Edwards. That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk under the topic constitutional reform. There'll be more in store.